Have you ever stopped and asked yourself a chilling question? Why don't you murder? It sounds insane, doesn't it? For most of us, the thought alone feels unthinkable. But for Dr. Dorothy Lewis, a renowned psychiatrist, this very question became an obsession. She dedicated her life to exploring the darkest corners of the human mind, searching for an answer that few dared to confront. Lewis wasn't drawn to killers out of fame, thrill, or some morbid fascination like the world might assume. She wasn't chasing headlines, and she certainly wasn't looking for glory. What pulled her in was something far more unsettling, a need to understand the hidden engine behind human cruelty. Why does one person grow up to love, to nurture, to create, while another grows up capable of the most unimaginable horrors? This question followed her for decades, and to find the answer, she didn't study case files from a distance or rely on second-hand reports. No. Dorothy Lewis sat face to face with killers themselves. She looked directly into the eyes of those who had destroyed countless lives, trying to find the fracture lines in their humanity. Over the course of her career, she interviewed more than 20 serial killers. Each encounter peeled back a different layer of darkness. There was Arthur Shawcross, a man who terrorized upstate New York, luring and murdering women with chilling coldness. And then there was Ted Bundy, perhaps the most infamous of them all. Bundy wasn't just terrifying because of what he did, but because of who he appeared to be. Handsome, articulate, charming, the kind of man people wanted to trust. And yet beneath that polished exterior lived one of history's most dangerous predators. These conversations weren't for the faint of heart. But for Lewis, every interview was a chance to inch closer to the truth. The truth about cruelty, the truth about fractured minds, and the truth about what really makes a killer. Her most groundbreaking belief: that serial killers aren't always the one-dimensional monsters society imagines. Instead, many of them may actually suffer from dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder. This wasn't about excusing their crimes, it was about peeling back the mask of evil and asking, what if? The mind itself was fractured, splintered into pieces, each identity carrying its own memories, its own rage, its own secrets. It was a theory that unsettled people because it blurred the line between pure evil and damaged humanity. Could the same person who smiled politely at neighbors also house another identity capable of unspeakable cruelty? For Lewis, the answer was yes, and she set out to prove it. This lifelong mission became the heart of HBO's chilling documentary, Crazy, Not Insane, directed by acclaimed filmmaker Alex Gibney. The film traces Lewis's decades of research, her controversial theories, and her relentless pursuit of the question that has haunted her since childhood: why do some people kill while others never cross that line? But answers never come easily, especially when the subject is Ted Bundy. Bundy wasn't just another name on a list of killers, he was a puzzle that defied simple explanations. Intelligent, manipulative, outwardly charming, and inwardly consumed by violence. For Lewis, Bundy represented the ultimate test of her theory. And what she discovered inside his fractured mind turned out to be even more disturbing than anyone had ever imagined. In 1986, Dorothy Lewis received one of the most chilling assignments of her career. She was called in by Ted Bundy's defense team to evaluate him, a man already etched in America's nightmares as a cold-blooded killer. For most, the thought of sitting across from Bundy was unthinkable, but for Lewis, this was an opportunity to dig deeper into the mind of someone the world only saw as a monster. Across 4 tense sessions, she found herself staring into Bundy's piercing eyes, Outwardly, he was calm, intelligent, even charismatic. But Lewis knew she had to look beyond the charm. She needed to find the cracks, the scars that might explain how a seemingly ordinary man could become one of history's most terrifying predators. Her conclusion? Bundy's darkness may have begun long before his crimes. She believed he carried deep psychological wounds, scars that traced back to his earliest years. He was raised in a household where cruelty and violence weren't rare, they were routine. At the center of it all was his grandfather, a man many described as extraordinarily brutal. And yet, disturbingly, Bundy spoke of him with fondness, almost as if his mind had blocked out the terror. Even as a toddler, Bundy displayed alarming behavior. Lewis uncovered one incident that still shocks anyone who hears it. At just 3 years old, young Ted placed butcher knives beside his sleeping aunt. Imagine that, a child barely old enough to form full sentences, silently arranging blades next to a loved one's body. Was it a sign of trauma, a cry for help, or the earliest glimpse of a fractured mind beginning to surface? For Lewis, this moment symbolized the start of Bundy's descent, not into pure evil, but into a mind twisted by violence, abuse, and unhealed psychological wounds. Lewis believed that this toxic combination, childhood trauma mixed with a possible genetic predisposition to mental illness, shaped Ted Bundy into something far more complicated than just a monster. To her, he wasn't simply born evil, he was the tragic result of cruelty, abuse, and a fractured mind. But even with all her research, her perspective would take a shocking turn after Bundy's death. It began when Bundy's wife reached out unexpectedly. She sent Lewis a collection of letters that Bundy had written during their marriage. At first glance, they looked like typical prison love notes, the kind of manipulative sweetness Bundy was famous for, filled with charm and false tenderness. But as Lewis studied them more closely, she noticed details that didn't quite fit. Some of the letters were signed Ted, but many weren't. They carried entirely different names that weren't random at all. Some were eerily similar to his grandfather's, the very man Lewis believed had cast such a dark shadow over Bundy's childhood. The deeper she read, the stranger it became. The handwriting shifted. The tone of voice in the letters changed, sometimes affectionate, sometimes cruel, sometimes distant. It was as if different personalities were speaking through the same hand. For Lewis, it was chilling confirmation of what she had long suspected. Bundy wasn't a single, unified person. It was as though multiple versions of him lived within one body, each carrying its own identity, its own memories, its own voice. And perhaps the man who charmed women, the man who wrote tender notes, and the man who killed were not the same Ted at all. Looking back, Lewis realized she may never have truly met the Ted who murdered. But why did Lewis dedicate her life to questions like these in the first place? The roots go all the way back to her childhood in New York City during World War II. Growing up in an era when humanity had just witnessed the horrors of Hitler, she was consumed by a single question. How can a human being be so cruel? That question became her compass, guiding her through decades of research. By chance, her studies led her to death row. After examining homicidal children, she discovered a chilling pattern. Many suffered from brain dysfunction, and almost all had grown up in brutally abusive households. One day, a public defender from Florida contacted her about a client on death row who reminded him of the children she had studied. Curious, Lewis agreed to evaluate him. And from that moment, she stepped into a world that would define her career. But not everyone welcomed her findings. Her theories, suggesting that murderers might be victims of fractured minds, were controversial. Many colleagues scoffed, dismissing her as eccentric, even crazy. Yet Lewis refused to back down. Alongside neurologist Jonathan Pincus, she pushed forward, combining psychiatry with neurology to uncover hidden truths. Together they faced skepticism, but they also influenced US Supreme Court rulings on capital punishment in 1988 and again in 2005. Despite her work, Lewis never saw herself as part of the booming true crime world. She didn't collect stories for entertainment. Yet, she admitted the genre had its uses, because families, often reluctant to talk to psychiatrists, would sometimes pour their hearts out to reporters and writers. Those books, those reports, even helped her piece together Bundy's fractured psyche. And yet, through all the data, all the interviews, one moment with Bundy lingers above the rest. Just before his execution, Bundy asked to see her one last time. She agreed. Inside that small room, the infamous killer who had terrified America stood before her. And as their meeting came to an end, something unexpected happened. Bundy bent down and kissed her gently on the cheek. Almost instinctively, she returned the gesture. Later that evening, Lewis walked into her kitchen where her husband and daughter were waiting. Half in jest, half in disbelief, she told them, "You are looking at the last woman to kiss Ted Bundy." It's a story that feels both surreal and haunting. But beneath it lies a disturbing truth. The question Lewis has been asking all her life. What truly separates us from those who kill? Maybe the most terrifying answer is this: the line is thinner than we think. And sometimes the darkness isn't out there in the shadows, it's already inside us waiting.